pretending to matter, Grace. You're returning to life, only this isn't enough. One trip to England never brought anyone back to life. This is only the beginning. I want us to go to Chicago, hunt down the crossbow killer, and bring him to justice. There's more. The ugly sisters, I want justice there too. I want them to suffer. Vengeance. Anyway, it's all your fault.
My fault?
You inspired me, Grace, with your bravery. You refused to let everyone's rejection of you define what you could probably become if you had a bit more courage.
Thank you.
You showed me the way. I can't hide in that house anymore. I have to be Dirk Simpson again, and I have to be proud of him.
Vengeance won't bring Victor back.
No, but it will bring us back.
How?
We'll matter again.
But there are other ways we can matter.
Grace, if I was the valet, and you were the wife, neither of us has existed for some time.
Welcome to part 2 of our Unconditional Love episode. But before we go into real talk, it's time for PP, our patron pitch. This is where we let our patrons know what they can expect in their exclusive patron feed. We also let non-patrons know what they're missing out on. And Alex, as we close the month of June, we're finally recording an episode post livestream for The Cure. So this is being recorded 2 days after our segment and the final day of the live stream. I think that we're still in recovery mode. If we are in recovery mode, I can only imagine how Nick, Dan, and Gerald are doing. It's very satisfying, but it's also very grueling and stressful. It's a lot of work that comes with putting up that event. We go through it just putting on like a 1 hour segment. So, but all this to say that we'll probably do something on Patreon, just like a little recap. I really want to go through the video and kind of like call out some of the highlights. I didn't get to read hardly any of the comments during our segment, and I like doing that after the fact, just to see if there's something that kind of fell through the cracks and didn't get addressed and so on. But we had a lot of fun. We did not hit our $1,000 goal, but we went past our halfway goal. Yeah. So that means that expect 3 from Hell and Spielberg's West Side Story to be on the main feed at some point before the next live stream. So there's that. And we'll go into more details, like I said, whenever we do this thing, and it'll be available to all patrons. Also available to all patrons, the Cutting Room Floor segments, where we put all the stuff that doesn't make it into the episodes that you guys might find interesting or funny, and also our bonus episodes. This month, our bonus episode comes courtesy of patron Jamie Russell, who's giving us the movie First Reformed, the tale of Ethan Hawke learning about climate change and taking some drastic measures, I guess, to handle it. We already recorded that episode. It's in the editing bay right now, but you should probably, by the time you listen to this, it's already up on your patron feed. So check that out. So that's available to all patrons, starting from the ground floor, the Travoltis, all the way to the top floor, the Gads. But now, if you want more content, then you have to be at least on the $3 tier. That's the Winonis. And then you get access to our pre-recording notes. You get access to our video reviews. This month, the video reviews are demanded by patron Jason Nerdrovert. It's giving you, Alex, the Banshees of Inisherin, 96%. Super fresh movie that was kind of an Oscars darling a few years ago. And I'm getting the movie Athena, 86%, also fresh. I don't know if that was an awards contender or not. Like I said in the last episode, I need to clarify with Nerdovert if I got the right Athena, if it's a 2022 Athena. But whatever the case, we'll have those video reviews up on the Patreon channel for patrons $3 and up. And we'll also have Contrarians After Hours. The spin-off show where we tell you about other things that we're watching, that we're listening to, that we are playing, thinking about. Alex, what are you bringing to Contrarians After Hours this time?
Julio, I recently made a jaunt to the movie theater to see a movie that I was pretty excited about. It's called In a Violent Nature. It's a new horror movie that hit theaters this past weekend, and I will be discussing my thoughts on it. I have several.
Is this Jason Voorhees for the new generation?
I mean, it's definitely a homage to the slasher movies of the day. And because it happens like on a park site, yeah, the immediate analogy or comparison is going to be Friday the 13th. This movie does have one of the most hilariously brutal and violent deaths I've ever seen in a movie. So there's at least that to discuss. There's a couple in this that are pretty fucking wild. But no, overall it's positive, but just have some things to discuss about it. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. The new Canadian slasher film put out by IFC Films, excuse me, In a Violent Nature. And for those of you who stick to streaming mostly, it's going to be out on Shudder later this year. So you can look for that. In the meantime, though, Julio, what are you going to be discussing?
Well, Alex, one really old thing and one not so old thing. First off, I finally kind of on a whim sat down and watched The Interview. Alex, do you remember The Interview, the movie that almost ended the world because he was going to cause North Korea to attack the U.S.?
That one, the James Franco, Seth Rogen movie? Yep.
It looked really stupid. I remember at the time that it came out, the supposed controversy about it didn't help. It didn't make me want to watch it. It was just like, this is even dumber. The controversy seemed even dumber than what the movie seemed to be. But I just needed something in the background while I was doing, chores. So I put it on and I actually laughed a lot. So I'm going to tell you about my experience watching The Interview. And then on the more recent side of things, I would say last year, maybe a couple of years ago, Disney Plus had a 10-episode series called Muppets Mayhem, which is a Muppets show focusing on Electric Mayhem, Dr. Teeth and Electric Mayhem, the band. They finally get the spotlight, and it is pretty awesome. I will go into detail about why it's awesome, but it's one of those things where you like the Muppets, then you're going to get at least some of what you like of the Muppets. I can see how there are purists that are going to go, well, it's not the Muppets because, maybe they're just a little too modern, a little too hip. I don't think so, but as documented during our Muppathon, we are pretty welcoming, I think, of most Muppet projects, whether they're old or new. So I was very, very happy with what they did with the band, the characters, and then the celebrities that they managed to bring in to the show. Because of course it's a Muppet, so you need celebrity cameos. It's good stuff. So Muppets Mayhem, The Interview, and then In a Violent Place, what's it called?
In a Violent Nature.
Okay, I was really close.
Oh, no, I was just laughing because one of the trailers that played before it was A Quiet Place, and I kept thinking, like, In a Quiet Place?
In a Quiet Nature. But that will be your after hours. And then if you want to be part of those patrons that tell us what to do, people like Nerdrovert, like Jamie, then you go up to the $5 tier, the Embreeze, or the $10 tier, the GATS, and then you get to shape the show. You get to tell us, hey, watch this, review this. So go to patreon.com/Contrarian Prime, look at our tiers, and see how you would like to join the Contrarian supplements.
$1, $3, $5, and $10 our respective tiers. Sign up, journey all the way back to the beginning. It all started, as most things do, with Blue is Warmest Color. Catch up along the way at our extremely comprehensive series on The Rock and John Cena's professional wrestling mega feud, and their movie careers, and our extremely comprehensive Lindsay Lohan career and life retrospective. She's on the comeback trail, so y'all best get ready. You have us to thank for that. And as I continue to say, we have some future projects lingering out there for when we cross certain thresholds of subscribers. So now's the time. Take a look. If you've ever thought about it, you should do it. That's what I'm going to tell you. And that is subscribing to our Patreon. You will not regret it. And you get to participate in the chat that often relies on Ryan being mean to me and asking me to speed up on editing and shit, which I need to do. But here nor there. To all of our current patrons, thank y'all. Love y'all dearly. And as I always say, we are accepting applications for new ones that'll be quickly reviewed and approved.
If you think of it, just do it. That's PJ Hogan's motto.
I was about to say, now how this was reviewed and approved, this being Unconditional Love, I guess it's just because he was the guy that did my best friend's wedding.
Is this his Nickelodeon, Alex? Let's find out.
Dirk was Victor Fox's longtime companion. And we've decided to hunt down the crossbow killer and bring him to justice.
Unconditional Love. That is, there's something I forgot to say in Contrarians Corner, but it's also, I guess, something that applies to Real Talk. You look at the poster, it says Unconditional Love. You see the smiley faces, and then you see the way that the story is shaping up. And it seems, actually, Kathy Bates verbalizes it at some point where she's talking about unconditional love. And that's just, you love somebody even if they don't love you back. You don't require anything in return. There's no expectations and so on. And as she was saying that, I was like, that's not good. That is what they call toxic. And I was glad that by the end of the movie, they actually argue against that, right? Like the whole point, her final decision in the movie is like, that's not how it's supposed to be. There's no unconditional love. It was like, if I'm going to love you, I expect you to love me back. And I was like, all right, we dodged that bullet. I'm glad that we were not pro unconditional love despite the title. There were other bullets that this movie didn't dodge, though. Do you have something to say before I get into some more reviews?
No, let's go ahead and do that because I feel like once I get going on this, I'm just going to keep going.
All right. Well, this all letterboxed because the Rotten Tomatoes pool is not just shallow, but it's empty. There's just like a couple puddles on the corners. So these are actually positive reviews from Letterboxd. We're going to go through these real quick. Audrey watched the movie on April 23rd, 2018, gave it 3.5 stars, and says, ignore its title and the ridiculous poster. This movie is fucking wild. Wild, all in caps. Hunter Plummer watched it February 28th, 2020. That's what we call a lockdown movie. Gave it 4 stars and says Julie Andrews did more than one day of filming.
February 2020?
Yeah, February 28th, 2020.
No, yeah, we were still a few weeks out.
Oh,
so
okay.
they probably went back and rewatched it 3 or 4 times just to make sure it was actually what they remembered.
It's the fever dream before the lockdown.
Yeah.
But they say Julie Andrews did more than one day of filming on this, and that fact is mind-boggling. Also, Meredith Eaton is a comedy icon. Next, Batia7 watched this January 19th, 2017, gave it 3.5 stars. Says Kathy Bates is such a versatile actress. She gives a rewarding performance, and her singing is lovely. I loved hearing Jonathan Pryce singing all of those standards. I thought it was cute to refer to those songs as standards, I guess, because they're oldies. They're oldies, right? Now that we're in Real Talk.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I like. If either of my grandmas listened to like songs in English, that's what I think they would be listening to. Next, Alex Kitty watched it September 23rd, 2016, gave it 3.5 stars. It says all over the place, but oddly charming in its way, with some very funny moments mixed with some very weird ones. Kathy Bates is too toned down to really work as a lead character, but Meredith Eaton steals the show, and Rupert Everett reminded me how hunky he is. The most important thing about this movie is the opening credits sequence, with middle-aged Jonathan Pryce in a sequin suit dancing among the clouds, performing Hitchcock Railway with a trio of sexy ladies and just fucking selling it. It's honestly one of the best credit sequences I've ever seen. So Jonathan Pryce performing Hitchcock Railway and the opening of Up. Those two are the top opening credit sequences. And then finally, Avery Ellis gives it 5 stars, watched it March 30th, 2023, and says, I don't need to review movies on some objective criteria, and neither should you. Saw this at the moment I needed to see it with the people I needed to watch it with.
I mean, that's fair.
That is very fair. That seems particularly applicable, I think, to a movie like this that is so hard to wrap your head around if you're using the standard metrics, I think. But we come at it for a very specific angle, Alex, because we watched Muriel's Wedding, then we watched My Best Friend's Wedding. So we had this kind of runway that I think in no way could prepare you for what this movie is. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I had no clue what I was getting into. Because also now I'm looking at, it's the DVD cover that's on the Wikipedia page, and I didn't even go that far into it. I just saw like the Kathy Bates, Rupert Everett, Dan Aykroyd, like all kind of like, oh, I don't know how she does it. And And it kind of starts that way of like, oh, this might be sad, and but lead to like some self-discovery. And it does, but it takes the most insane route to get there. Like right when the murder and then it was revealed there's a serial killer in Chicago, I was like, what the fuck? It just like one thing after another with this. I was just like, what is happening with this movie? And so I was not prepared for it, which made definitely for an interesting first time viewing. And yeah, I can early spoiler. This is not a good movie, but it's not boring, and it's a movie that I would tell anyone to watch because like everything we explained and described in the first half does not sound like a real movie that exists, and it does, and that makes this fascinating. But tell me about your viewing with your friend that loves it dearly. What did you think about this the first time you saw it?
See, it's a little different when you when you don't do it as part of this thing that we're doing, because my memory of PJ Hogan's movies was a lot hazier. So my first thought was like, I watched it and I was like, I guess his movies are like this. You know, like even My Best Friend's Wedding, I had seen it. It'd been so long since I'd watched it. That was like, I remember it being quirky and I remember it having a lot of music in it, and same thing with Muriel's Wedding. So I was like, I guess this is kind of like that. Now that I watched those two a lot more recently, I can see that. I mean, yes, there's some elements in that they have in common, but this is also so much more of everything, for better and for worse. When I watched it the first time, it was one of those things where, you have a friend that tells you, hey, I'm going to show you my favorite movie. And I told her at the beginning, I was like, what happens if I don't like it? If I don't like it, it's going to be a really awkward conversation. And she's like, no, but that's fine. You can just tell me. And so I watched it and I liked it, but it's one of those things where the thing that brought you to watch it certainly influences how you're watching it, right? Because we're watching it together with my wife and our friend. And by the way, let's shout out my friend Liz, who, those of you who were at the live stream for The Cure during our segment, her and her husband, that invasion from another Twitch channel that was them. Like that was their people. Oh. Yeah, they have this Twitch channel where they Jake, it's a unique bovine. He plays games, and they knew that it was going to happen, and they said, we're going to try to bring some people, and then they just, I guess they call it a raid, right, in Twitch.
Holy Moses, what? Raid of 48 people from Unique Bovine. Thank you so much. Welcome to the live stream for The Cure. We're here raising money for the Cancer Research Institute.
Special friend.
And a bunch of follows are going to come. Oh, God. A bunch of follows are going to come in. You.
Yeah, I don't want to seem too old and out of touch. I had no idea what that meant when they were talking about that. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. That makes sense.
There's people. Yeah, so they she's checked out the live stream before, like other years that we've gone. She's really cool like that. She's very supportive and she loves movies. So when you're watching a movie with somebody that loves that movie, then that informs a little bit how you experience it for sure. And I was predisposed to I didn't care about objectivity. I was like, I'm going to put my best foot forward to enjoy this movie and just rescue everything that's good about it so that I'm not the grump that doesn't like my friend's favorite movie. Mm-hmm. So it's a very particular way of experiencing the movie especially for the first time. But man, it's all about the context too, because we just did Illegally Yours, which felt like the most stale 80s comedy that came from a director that seemed to have almost like that director seemed to clearly just be doing it for the paycheck, right? Yeah. And here comes this guy that was coming off an incredibly successful second movie, and there's no pretension here. There's just this series of wild swings, and I think I find that endearing. That really helps me just take the movie at face value. It's like, oh, so Julie Andrews is singing now? Sure, I'll take it. Oh, there's a serial killer. Oh, there's a fantasy sequence. there's a lot that doesn't quite gel in this movie, but I think it has its heart in the right place, and that ultimately helps me. I think that, man, you change one thing either in the way that I came to watch it, or in the way that the movie is executed, or the cast, or anything. You change one of the circumstances, and then I would start cringing. But somehow it's just like right on the right side of not making me cringe. And instead, I just find it endearing and amusing and really funny at times, really touching at others.
So did you have like any bigger overarching takeaways when watching it for this episode?
I mean, my first big takeaway is kind of like what I said in the Contrarians Corner. He loves music. That love for music, I think, comes through in his movies, and in this one, it almost goes overboard, right? Like just the idea that almost every character breaks into song at some point, and they don't just break into song, but they break into song with a purpose, right? Whether it's Dan Aykroyd trying to win Kathy Bates back by singing to her, or the three friends, Kathy Bates, Rupert Everett, and Meredith Eaton singing at Peter Sarsgaard to calm him down, or Julie Andrews singing to the people on the plane so they don't panic, and so on. Like, it's more so than in Muriel's Wedding and in My Best Friend's Wedding. Like, this is here where it's like he wanted to make a musical, but not quite. He didn't take that final step. And I think that he has just a very quirky sense of humor. I'm very curious what's going to happen, because the next movie of his that we're doing is Peter Pan, which is a very, very standard, from what I remember, just like it's a Hollywood movie, right? And so Muriel's Wedding has those wild swings from really funny stuff to really dark stuff. I mean, we talked about it in the episode. And then My Best Friend's Wedding is like he goes to Hollywood and he just adapts to the formula. He does it really well, but it's obviously a Hollywood movie and it doesn't have those wild tone changes. It's just very much more like what we expect when we go to the movies, growing up with American movies. And then this is almost like, oh, he went back to that Muriel's Wedding mindset of like, we're just going to go from one side of the other of the emotional spectrum. And then in the next movie, oh, it's just Peter Pan. It's just like a more standard telling of this story. So is this the real PJ Hogan, and that he adapts himself to make his Hollywood movies? Or is this just what happens when he doesn't have a clear idea of what he wants to do? It's like, is there a more disciplined, more like put together version of this movie? And is that version like as charming as this movie can be to somebody that likes it? I mean, I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I know it confuses you and perplexes you, but when you're done with it, do you come away with it with anything other than that was really weird?
Not really, because there's no consistent tone, and like the different paths don't converge in like a way that makes sense from like a storytelling perspective, from like just making a cohesive movie. And the whole thing of Dan Aykroyd wanting out and then immediately wanting back in, and that it takes that for her to realize she wants out, and there's really no connectivity there. And I guess the soundtrack's cool, but then even like the score, I think I read James Newton Howard did the score, which shout out.
He's everywhere.
He is. Like when it has like the triumphant score at the end when they kill Peter Sarsgaard, it's like, what the fuck is going on, man? See, this is a rare occasion of like, I can't even like offer like, maybe if they did this, they would, because this is like 3 different movies, and I don't know how you make this movie successfully trying to tell this exact story that it's trying to tell. I could see how folks enjoy this, don't get me wrong, because it is so off the wall. To me, there was like, it made no sense, really. Like, if you want to split hairs, yes, the general idea made sense, but like, they're friends and now they're going to kill this guy. Like, when did that get put on the table? Like, why do we need a gun? But at no point was I like looking at my watch or, begging for this movie to conclude. I was just like, man, this isn't good, but this is fucking weird.
We're gonna catch the crossbow killer. He comes quietly, or we blow him away.
I actually have an easier time buying everything that happens because I had this fallback before. Did you ever watch The Lovely Bones?
Is that the Jennifer Lawrence movie? No, that's Winter's Bone. I'm sorry.
No, that's Winter's Bone. Very different movie. No, Lovely Bones
Lovely
is based on
Bones,
the book.
Stanley Tucci, right?
Yes, Stanley Tucci,
Yeah.
Saoirse Ronan, Mark Wahlberg. I just remember that he's the dad in that movie. And then Rachel Weisz is the mom. It was based on a very popular book. And basically, Saoirse Ronan is I think she's dead. She dies. Like Stanley Tucci kills her at the beginning of the movie.
I'm immediately remembering the trailer for this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, she's missing. And basically the entire movie is her from the afterlife trying to nudge the investigation of her death so they can find her body and, and then she can rest in peace. I think maybe that's it, like I said, Rachel Weisz and Mark Wahlberg are the parents and Stanley Tucci is the killer that nobody knows, he's the killer. But anyway, I think Susan Sarandon plays the grandma. Like it's either Rachel Weisz's or Mark Wahlberg's mother. And she comes into the house at some point and there's this really weird musical sequence where she is just the other, the siblings of Saoirse Ronan that are mourning. She starts doing activities with them and it's like this weird musical montage. And I remember that was one of the things that movie did not, from what I remember, was not received well. And that was one of the sequences that people would point out to me, like, what the fuck was that? And I remember when I watched it, I didn't think there were a lot of things I didn't like about the movie, but I remember thinking that was a moment that felt very true in the sense that grieving is a very subjective, very unique thing that affects people in very specific ways. And so it's kind of like there's no right way of grieving because you don't know how it's going to hit you, right? The way that you process grief is very particular to where you're in life, what your past experiences have been. And, you're grieving this way now, you may grieve a different way later. And so for the grandma to show up and have like this musical montage where she's like trying to distract the kids and help them cope, I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, when you're grieving, like anything goes. And in that sense, like, I think that this movie, I mean, the way I read it, I don't know, PJ Hogan, give us a call, correct me. What were you trying to say with this movie? I'm all ears. But the other thing that I feel like, it's kind of his expression of love for music. But then the other thing is, I think that what ties everything together is that everybody's grieving, right? Like the entire world is grieving because apparently Victor Fox was this major figure. And when you're grieving, you just do things that don't make sense. So when you're grieving, you just get on a plane and fly to England. And when you're grieving, you decide that, what I need for closure is to kill the man that murdered my lover.
Yes, but you have people around you to tell you that's not what you need to be doing.
Right. But it's a movie, Alex. So
yes.
So in this movie, what it posits is that you have Kathy Bates, who's in that mindset, and you have Rupert Everett, who's in that mindset. And when they get together, what they do is they feed off each other, They're clearly going through some heavy shit. They're imagining Jonathan Pryce as, dancing with them and telling them stuff. And they both have like very strong unresolved feelings about the relationship. So I buy it. I mean, I don't think it's a smooth ride. I don't think that, I think it's weird, but because they're grieving, I find it so much easier to buy that if these were people that were just acting like that because, I don't know, because they just felt like it. But I'm like, oh, you're grieving. You're not in your right mind. So you make all these really outrageous calls. If I didn't like the characters, I think that would be an obstacle. Then they'll probably start getting on my nerves, because there's only so much I can take from somebody that's not acting in the right mind. And it can start getting frustrating. But because I think they're funny and I think they're sweet, I think they're charismatic, then I can go with them. And I think it helps a lot that now that we're in real talk, I think Meredith Eaton is really funny. I called her the Rupert Everett of this movie. And I do mean it. I mean, I think that she's kind of like the breakout performance here. Did you like her?
Are you picking on my mother-in-law because she's a housewife who reminds you of your own mother who you probably despise? Or is it that my being a dwarf makes you so uncomfortable, but you'll be fired if you aren't polite to a dwarf?
She was fine. She was, funny in some parts and definitely has a presence, but not to the point where I didn't think she was like the MVP or something that was a shining light of this movie.
I just remember you also were not that impressed by Rupert Everett in My Best Friend's Wedding.
Yeah, these PJ Hogan movies just clearly work a lot better for you than they do for me. I'm like shocked to hear you praise this movie. But again, there's some positive emotion you have attached to it, and that goes a long way.
Well, I'll tell you something that doesn't work, and you'll probably agree with me. I think that the first 30 minutes or so, the Kathy Bates character is just so passive and so weak in a way. You know, it's like everybody's like walking all over her. And even when she's taking charge and, you know, calls the studio to see if she can get another ticket and so on, she's just so mild-mannered. I remember it happened the first time I watched the movie, and it happened again as I was rewatching it. It was just like, oh God, I don't really like her as a protagonist. And then as the story goes on and she starts kind of finding her voice and becoming a little more proactive and more decisive, then she starts winning me over. But I think that first stretch of the movie, I think probably until she travels to England, I think that's kind of rough. I like Kathy Bates, but I prefer her when she's playing a character that has a little more of a backbone and has more to do other than just sit there and let everybody else push her around. Like, I understand why she needs to be that way at the beginning of the movie so that she can go on her journey, but that I found a little frustrating at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, this movie's too long. But again, there's so many hard right turns in this that it bought it plenty of time. But yeah, if I was going to say something about that first act, is it takes her kind of too long to realize life's too short, I guess. That's the overall message of the story. Because basically, she's this woman who's content, realizes there's more to life, and then that just turns into levels of excess that we couldn't even imagine just through the friendship she forms and whatnot. But yeah, it takes a while to get there, and like it almost makes Kathy Bates a bit too much of a sad sack. Like that part where she just like is waiting to get that ticket, it doesn't come, and so she just gets all sad and starts taking her makeup off and stuff. And again, this is in the same movie that Peter Sarsgaard is a serial killer that uses a crossbow as his weapon. Wild shit, man.
But also, Alex, and this applies to both the filmmakers that we're covering this summer. I mean, I don't even need to point it out because it's obviously we've been talking about it, but it's just we've spent the last 6 episodes, I guess, like talking about movies that are wholly original. Like they're not based on a pre-existing IP. Yeah. They're not sequels. They're not remakes. It's kind of refreshing, even Illegally Yours, which was a big miss for both of us.
No, this movie definitely feels like cocaine days of Hollywood, of like pitching this script and New Line Cinema just being like, yeah, whatever. You know, that's I talk about that all the time. That's what's gone. Even, you know, the titans of the internet, with the exception of like Nolan and Oppenheimer, because I remember Universal fought really hard. Like they were going to break the bank to get the rights to doing the next Nolan movie. Because, you know, for his big ones in the past 15, 20 years, it's been WB that puts them out. Universal obviously made the right call. I think it worked out okay for that studio. What I'm saying, though, is like there aren't Scorsese. We've talked about it. Scorsese had to make a straight to Netflix movie because like there's not that earned trust anymore, or dare I even say like blind trust of filmmakers as there was at one point in time. But just the idea of this, my best friend's wedding made $300 million. So yeah, here you go. Do whatever you want. And there's charm to that.
I said this was his Nickelodeon, but really, is it his Southland Tales?
No, because my best friend's wedding is a good movie and Donnie Darko's not.
But in the sense of, right, he made a movie that, like it or not, had an impact. And so then the studio said, all right, you can do whatever you want next. And then they made movies that are not accessible to everyday audiences. I don't know. I mean,
the most fascinating part about this to me is he partnered with Jocelyn Moorhouse again. And obviously she didn't write Muriel's Wedding, but she was a producer on it. And for a movie, an indie movie like that's a big role to have in the creative process, being a producer. And it's just kind of funny that they made that. And there is some offbeat stuff in that movie that we talk about in that episode. But to come back with this is pretty shocking.
So did this movie not get a fair chance? Because you said it was shelved, right? Like I haven't looked into the backstory.
It got no chance. So this movie was shot in late 1999 and early 2000 in Chicago and England, but New Line Cinema continually postponed the American release, leaving the film on the shelf until finally premiering it on the Starz network in August of 2003 and then sending it straight to DVD that October.
So no theatrical.
What I was able to find, it looks like it did have a theatrical release in Italy that was documented that made less than $500,000.
It was dubbed in Italian.
Yes.
Kathy Bates, buongiorno.
So I think someone at New Line, and you got to think about the movies New Line's put out. God love them. Like that New Line signature at the beginning of the movie, that's like a childhood staple. And just me sitting with my legs crossed in front of the TV watching movies. But New Line, hasn't always been the standard bearer. And someone there watched this movie and went absolutely fucking nut. Said, no
Who did this
way.
guy think he is? Well, he made My Best Friend's Wedding.
And the Starz network of all things. That's not even Showtime, man. You're going straight to Starz. So yeah, this was not really given a fair shake. So I can understand too that the people that love this movie, it's an earned love because it's a movie you had to seek out or you found, happenstantially at some point and scrolling movies or watch it on TV or something like that. I can totally get why this is a movie that would have people like your friend that it's their favorite movie. It has all the makings of that. I just don't think it's a good movie. And you know what? Your favorite movie doesn't have to be a good movie. Talk about that all the time. Because it's good to you. It's good to somebody. But all right, looks like it had a UK release too in 2002. But who knows?
They flew Kathy Bates for the premiere. Nobody knew who she was.
They had Julie Andrews sing. What's the song she sings in this?
Getting to Know You.
Getting to Know You. Yeah.
Julie Andrews is in the cockpit.
Thank God.
So I find myself more fascinated by everything surrounding this movie and not the actual movie itself. And like I said just a minute ago, there's a charm to these types of movies and a sadness that comes about that shit like this isn't made today. It's immediately on the list of if I ever come across Kathy Bates, I'm like, man, what was making that movie like? Or Peter Sarsgaard specifically, because he was still pretty fresh in the game. He had good amount of acting credits before this, but Boys Don't Cry, Cell. So 2003 into 2004 is when the 1-2 of Shattered Glass and Garden State came out, which were kind of the ones that took him up to another level. And then of course Jarhead came out in 2005.
Right.
But that's what makes his performance in this pretty endearing is how hard he's going for it. He's like screaming and crying, and this was his shot. And fucking hey, I would have thought so too. Working with a guy who just made My Best Friend's Wedding. You're opposite Kathy Bates, Rupert Everett, Dan Aykroyd's looming around on set somewhere. Jonathan Pryce just showed up for a day.
Julie Andrews.
So yeah, there's something romantic about this movie in the sense of how it used to be better. But dude, I wholly believe it was greenlit just based on the merit of My Best Friend's Wedding, and then whoever okayed it, they signed off on it. That when they got like the dailies, they were like, "Oh no, that Will Arnett meme. I've made a terrible mistake."
I think it's also possible that whoever greenlit it, maybe because it happens sometimes, right? Like they got fired or they went somewhere else, and whoever inherited the project, they're like, "Oh,
True.
Yeah, I don't find this amusing at all." I didn't even like My Best Friend's Wedding. Get this guy out of here. It is impressive that PJ Hogan bounced back, because this being such a big failure on just a very basic distribution level, it would make you think that, well, why would you hand this guy a Peter Pan movie next? So I don't know if that speaks to how much goodwill he had after My Best Friend's Wedding, that he could still survive a major miss like this one, or just that back then maybe the business was a little more forgiving. That seems like a ridiculous thing to say, but maybe, I don't know. I remember hearing that you get 3 strikes when you're a filmmaker or an actor. But I mean, we know that there are times where that's not the case. Sometimes there's just like the one movie that undoes you. So it didn't seem to be the case in this one. And it could just be that whoever's watched the movie they can sense that, this is not going to play well. It's not going to make us any money. But like I said, I think that it has a heart, and maybe sometimes that's just enough. Like, you know what? Next time we're going to give you a property that we know it's already structured in a way that the audiences can consume it easily. I give you Peter Pan, and you can inject all this heart into it. But I like it, man. That was, I guess, on rewatch, because I knew that it was going to be really weird and kind of like take all these wild turns. I was able to kind of like sit back and just zero in on the emotional parts. And it's not just the grieving, but just this idea that people that have found themselves lost in their relationships, like they lose their identities to their relationships. And then when those relationships end, they realize that, well, I'm not there anymore. Like I need to rebuild myself. And they have those conversations, Rupert Everett and Kathy Bates. And I find them very interesting, very compelling. Like I was very happy when they finally stopped fighting and they connected and they started bonding over that stuff. So that's also something that I think wins me over when it comes to it. I think it's a far cry from the structure of the almost perfect structure of My Best Friend's Wedding. And it's definitely a lot more scatterbrain. It's like the way it's made, it's like a lot more scattershot than Muriel's Wedding. Mm-hmm. So definitely out of those three that we've watched, it's easily the one that has, it's not quite there, but I think that the heart is there the way that it was in Muriel's Wedding and the way that it was in My Best Friend's Wedding. And the way that it wasn't switching to the other lane in Our Summer, the way that the Legally Yours didn't have a heart almost. It just felt like Bogdanovich and autopilot. That's not what I felt here. This was not autopilot. This was a guy really giving it its all, and it just came out in that really shapeless, weird manner. So I get it. I was wondering when, as I was watching, I was like, man, there's a good chance that Alex is just going to hate it. And I was like, oh, maybe he'll just find it amusing. I figured that the music would be a determining factor. It's like, if you hate the music, then you're going to really be tuned out because there's music all over.
Definitely don't hate it. I think it's just interesting. And that's a really underplaying word of like, it's just fucking nuts, man. And there's a likelihood I'm going to watch this movie again at some point in my life. And I couldn't turn away from it, which I suppose is the best compliment I can pay it. You think Maggie Gyllenhaal's seen this? Like, is that how she met Peter Sarsgaard? It was like, hey, really liked you in Unconditional Love. And he was like, oh, God.
That's when Sarsgaard just fell down to his knee.
Yes.
Marry me.
He proposed on the spot. Yeah, not enough to like make me like borderline praise it. You're not even borderline. You are praising it. It's a movie I watch and I immediately say, God, I wish that we were still making movies like this. But then, like, they weren't even making movies like that. Then they made it and they were like, all right, never mind. Get Phil from the Stars Network on the line. We got to work out a deal with this one. But if you haven't seen it, check it out. Because I know that what we have said in explaining this movie sounds interesting. Because just like talking about this movie with someone who has zero knowledge of it is just like, what? And it's even one, if I talked to someone in person about it and it came up, I'd be like, I'm not even going to go into discussion about it. Just watch it. Just prepare yourself. Be prepared.
You're just like everybody else. No, I'm not. Look at us. Do we look like everybody else? We're not. We're like you. We're unloved, unnoticed.
You know what it feels like? And I don't know if you have this thing to go back to in your memory bank, but the idea of you just falling asleep, you turn the TV on, and like now you don't do it. Like I don't do it. Now I have streaming, whatever. So I'll just go and I'll pick whatever I want to watch and I fall asleep to. But once upon a time, I would just fall asleep to whatever was on TV. I'll turn it on and I would just be dropped right in the middle of a movie that I didn't know. And sometimes those movies, especially because I was dropped right in the middle of it, they would just seem really weird and really like I didn't know where it was going. It starred people that I didn't know. Movies that they played like at midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning.
Oh yeah, man. That's as a teenager, preteen teenager, that was, on Friday night in my room falling asleep with TNT on when Monster Vision would come on, and I'd wake up at 1 or 2 in the morning and what was it? part 5. Is it the Dream Child? Nightmare on Elm Street. There's like a motorcycle scene in that where like Freddy turns into like a motorcycle and, you know, makes someone crash. And I remember just like waking up and like, you know, fighting, you know, that twilight area where you're still kind of asleep and seeing that and be like, what the fuck? So I know exactly what you're talking about. And this is exactly that kind of movie where you could see yourself waking up at 3 a.m. and Kathy Bates is hanging off of a bridge, a movable bridge with a crossbow pointed at her. And then you guys go back to sleep and then you wake up the next morning and be like, was that real? Did I dream that?
You start telling somebody about it. And then and your mind says, well, I missed some stuff. So obviously the stuff that I missed makes it all make sense.
Yes.
But in this case, we watched the movie beginning to end. But it's that feeling of like, you know, if you kind of blur your eyes, it all comes together.
If you squint.
Yeah. Anyway, not a miss for me. It's a weird movie, but I think that, like I keep saying, it has its heart in the right place, and I think that just makes up for a lot. So I had it at 3 stars the first time I watched it, and I'm happy to announce I'm bumping it up half a star because I was really taken by the musical numbers this time. It's not my kind of music, like I said, but there's something to seeing both Dan Aykroyd and Kathy Bates when they sing, when they have their moments where they sing. I found it pretty enchanting. Like Aykroyd, I completely forgotten that from the first time I watched it. So when he starts singing, it's like, oh my God, what's happening? I'm supposed to not like you. And here you're just like putting on the effort. So 3.5 for me, Alex. What is your score?
Sadly, I should have gone first because you had the uplifting review there. It's probably a D. Like that translates to like a 2-star review on Letterboxd, but it's insane. And it's a movie I certainly will never forget. And, you know, we joke about it at this point. You know, we've talked about, I don't know, what number is this episode?
Man, we're like in the past the 200, you know,
yeah, so we've
10, not counting bonuses and patron.
Well, I was going to say, including bonuses and patron, we're probably close to like 250 movies that we've discussed via podcasting. And there are a lot of those that have just come and gone. And I don't famously that
mute.
All right. It's a movie I watched for this. I recorded 2 hours. I spent 2 hours of my life talking about it. I remember nothing about that movie besides the fact Paul Rudd has a mustache. Like this is categorically will not be one of those movies that I forget about. And it's one that we will be referencing from now until the end of this podcast, whenever that may be, as just like, yeah, but remember Unconditional Love? You can just do crazy shit and it makes a movie work. So I want to stress that I don't think it's a good movie, but there is a charm and something entirely unique about it that's worth celebrating. So there you go.
You take out the crossbow killer with a mobile phone. That must have been a David and Goliath moment for you.
So what is next? How do we top that?
How do we top that? Well, as we've been referencing, next time we visit PJ Hogan, it'll be his comeback to the mainstream with Peter Pan, a movie that, as far as I remember, was not shelved. It was kind of like a big deal when it came out. So he bounced back. But that's not next episode. Next episode, it's another Bogdanov film. And it's also a bounce back of sorts, because after you have a 0%er and Legally Yours, then the only way, there's nowhere to go but up. So we're going to be doing Noises Off. That's 62% of the tomato meter, 62, 61%. 1992 movie, so a few years after, but we're now Bogdanovich into the 90s. This is a movie I've seen a number of times. You can look up the cast, Alex. A bunch of all-stars. We have Michael Caine. We have John Ritter coming back to the Contrarians and to a Bogdanov film. And then we have Superman himself, Christopher Reeve.
My God.
If you thought that we were done with the pratfalls and the physical humor, just the overall Bogdanovich shenanigans, think again, because this is more of that, but in the 90s. So that's coming up next. And then after that, we'll do Peter Pan.
Man, that's quite the 1-2 punch we got coming up. So, but as we've learned so far in this summer journey, all bets are off.
Yes.
There's no predictability here.
And before we head out, Alex, I wanted to shout out, by the time that you guys listen to this, the episode will be out for like a month, but we guessed it on the Countdown podcast. We talked about our most memorable movie-going experiences. So Alex and I had a list of 10. Paul and Wayne had a list of 10. You guys listen to the Countdown, you know how it works. So we traded back and forth stories, and it was a lot of fun. And I listened to the episode when it dropped, and it was great. So if for some reason you haven't checked it out yet, even though it's been out for a month, what are you waiting for? Go so you can hear Paul, Wayne, Alex, and I talk about sad, happy, horny, funny stories about times we went to the theater and stuff happened. So check that out.
Hell yeah.
And now, Alex, I think we're ready to go.
Let's get out of here. Welcome to our end credits.
Or as we usually call them, our perennial plugs.
We start off by giving thanks to the Festive Years who provide our opening and closing tracks. They kick us off with Last Stand and take us home with Summer of 99. Be sure to head over to thefestiveyears.com for any and all Festive Years needs.
Our friend and fellow podcaster Hans Rothgieser is the man behind our logo and all the art you see related to our show. Reach out to him and let him know how much you like that little tomato. His email address is mildemonios@hotmail.com and his website is mildemonios.pe. That's MILDEMONIOS. You can also check out his podcast Nación Combi about Peruvian current affairs and Marginal about economy. Hans, thank you for all your support.
For those interested in the regularly absurd world of professional wrestling, Joe and the boys over at latenightgrin.com have you covered. Tell them the Contrarians sent you.
And we like to close with special thanks to our social media team of Zoe Perez and Coriari. Each of the social media accounts we mentioned in the introduction look as good as they do because of their work.
So that'll do it for this episode of The Contrarians, where we're right and you're wrong, and we will catch you next time.
How much money he makes a year